Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Fox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hey, Skull King Football. Welcome back to another Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood, and we are continuing our inside analysis interviews. And today, I am very happy to share this latest interview that I did with Scott Reiss, the voice of Stanford Cardinal Football, to talk about the electric Christian McCaffrey. I think we have a really good conversation. Christian is one of those guys that has been kind of thrown all over the map into, yes, he's the real deal, no, he's not. And so Scott and I get into that a little bit about what type of running back he is, about the people who, tried to pigeonhole Christian McCaffrey. So I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Scott Reiss, the voice of Stanford Cardinal Football. Hey, Skull King Football, welcome back to another Inside Analysis interview. Today we are talking with Mr. Scott Reiss, the voice of Stanford Cardinal Football, to talk about one of the highly touted running backs in the draft this year, Mr. Christian McCaffrey. Scott, welcome to the show today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right. So, let's go ahead and get in. Christian has had quite the last couple years. 2 years ago in 2015, being a Heisman Trophy candidate with the explosive year, the record-setting year that he had, and then this last year. If you could give us maybe just a little bit of a background on what you know of Christian and just kind of the year he had this past year.
Yeah, first of all, he's a tremendous person. I think that's where you have to start. He's as good a person as he is a football player, which speaks volumes because he's an unbelievable football player. When you talk about recruiting high character guys, which Stanford tries to do, Christian's certainly a guy at the top of that list. As far as this past season, the numbers were down. There was nowhere to go but down after you've had the single greatest season in college football history, which he did in 2015. But injury basically was a big part of it. He got hurt in the second or third game of the year against USC, got dinged up, tried to play through it, was less effective. It was pretty clear to us that something was amiss. And then finally he sat out a game in the middle of the season to get healthy. He sat out the Notre Dame game. And he came back, and once he was feeling closer to 100%, second half of the year, he looked like his old self, and he put up big numbers. Yeah,
he actually finished this past year, even though he didn't quite have the total yards. His average was still a little bit higher at 6.3 yards per carry over 6 yards a carry. He didn't have he obviously didn't have as many punt and kickoff returns, like you said, because of the injury, sitting out the game. But again, he is a very of a lot of the places I've seen, he's described as the shiftiest player in this draft.
He is shifty, but I think that's where, the naysayers and the skeptics, I think, get too caught up in that aspect of the game. He is, obviously he has that, and he is explosive, but there's so much more that makes him special, and I don't throw that term out too often. But he is a special player because he has so many attributes that you just don't appreciate unless you watch him day in and day out. He is so patient. His knack for waiting that extra beat for a lane to develop, knowing exactly when to hit the accelerator, and then having the ability to accelerate through that hole and break the first tackle is something I don't think enough folks really appreciate. His patience, his vision, same sort of scenario where he knows exactly where to run. I've seen a lot of guys who had all kinds of physical tools, but the hole opens up to the left and they run to the right because they just don't see it. And Christian's obviously not that guy. And he's also powerful. And the bench press at the combine being what it was, Christian McCaffrey is a strong kid, and he's stronger than he looks. And this is not a guy who made his living running, outside the tackles on sweeps, for 3 years at Stanford. This is a guy who, picked up a lot of his yards between the tackles, yards after contact. His yards after contact actually better than Fournette and Dalvin Cook, which a lot of people don't realize, and that sort of makes you go, wow. So when you talk about a guy who is the complete package in terms of his skill set, he is the complete package. Now, obviously, you'd love it if he was, 6'2" and 220 and could do everything that he could do. And that's certainly the one thing that's going to keep him from being, a 25 carry back in the NFL. But other than that, he is absolutely the complete package.
Yeah, he's one thing I noticed again, watching some of his game tape. I'm actually from Seattle and the big University of Washington Husky fan, so I've gotten to watch Christian McCaffrey in a few games against us. So seeing how he plays, he doesn't necessarily look for contact. He doesn't. But he's his ability to avoid contact when he doesn't need to make contact with, say, running into a linebacker is absolutely amazing. You talked about his patience and his vision. Kind of gave me a little bit of a thought of how Le'Veon Bell tends to run. He'll sit and just have his hand on the back of one of his offensive linemen, waiting, and then he sees the hole open up, and then he explodes through it. And I could see, not trying to say that he's going to be the next Le'Veon Bell, but he has that sort of vision and patience to wait for the hole to show up, and then he has that shiftiness and that elusiveness to get through even the smallest hole.
No, I think that's a good point, and obviously not the same player physically as Le'Veon Bell, but in terms of some of those attributes, I think it's a fair comparison. He's so smart, all these physical attributes, and he's got the brain to sort of process everything, at the drop of a hat and make, whether it is, you say, seek out contact or run around contact. And the other thing, and the reason you could really tell that he was hurt those few games this past year is it was that stretch of 2 or 3 games is the only time in Christian's college career where we saw him consistently brought down by the first tackler. When he's healthy, that never happened. I mean, it was nearly impossible in space or even in tight quarters for the first guy to bring him down. Christian, he would turn 4-yard runs into 7-yard runs routinely. And if you ask Coach Shaw, the most impressive thing about Christian, he would always say, it's sort of the little things that, if the play is blocked for 3, he would get 6. And he does that time and time and time again. And that's a really tough thing to do.
Yeah. Kind of some of the comparisons that I've seen is he's not necessarily the goal line guy who's gonna just drop his shoulder and hammer through it. While he can do that, that's not necessarily his full game. Some of the comparisons I've seen is a Tiki Barber type from back with the Giants, or even right now, kind of I've seen him also labeled as like a faster, younger Danny Woodhead who can run between the tackles when called upon. But his strength is catching the ball out of the backfield, using his elusiveness in space.
Right, and I think everybody wants to put a label on him, and everybody wants to try and compare him to somebody. He's a really tough comp.
Yes.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's going to be the best running back in NFL history, but he is going to be, I think, one of the more unique running backs in NFL history, just because his skill set and his speed and his ability to catch the ball and everything that he brings to the table. I think it makes him tough to pigeonhole. Early on they said, oh well, he's not big enough to play running back in the NFL, so he's Julian Edelman. They'll put him in the slot. But now people are realizing, you know what, he can play running back in the NFL. And again, I'm not going to blow smoke and tell you he's going to carry 25, 30 times as a true every down back, because that's not going to happen at his size. But he is a running back. He can play running back. And you talk about the goal line carries. He was not the goal line back in 2015, the year that he should have won the Heisman, because he was without question the best college football player in the country.
Correct, he was.
His touchdown numbers were low. And I think that probably hurt him in the Heisman balloting, that and the fact that, West Coast and people didn't see him until probably it was too late.
Correct.
But the reason was Stanford had a guy in Ramon Wright who was their designated short yardage guy. And, if you're a fantasy player, you know the term vulture. I mean, Ramon Wright vultured probably 12 touchdowns from McCaffrey over the course of the year. Could Christian have run that in from a 1? Of course he could have, but they didn't let him. And in 2016, to my point, they said, okay, you're the guy now. And he was the short yardage back. And I can't remember him getting stuffed on 3rd and 1 or 3rd and goal from the 1 more than once or twice the entire season. I mean, he was as effective as a 240-pound bruiser in that role. So he is more than capable of getting that one tough yard when you need it.
Yeah, getting back to his athleticism, he doesn't necessarily need to, just drop his shoulder into someone. He can jump over the line. I've seen multiple highlights where he's jumping over the line to get into the end zone. So,
correct.
He has that ability.
He can go over, and he can also go back to the shiftiness and the vision. He can also pick a spot and go under, or he can go around. He's a guy who doesn't have to go through, and that's part of his skill set.
Yeah, he really has been so impressive over these last couple of years. And again, we go back to that 2015 year where he should have won the Heisman. He's a phenomenal athlete. And you spoke a little bit, just a great person. I know that his with his family. Just the values and everything that they have, just a solid, he's had a solid upbringing. One last thing that I want to go over, just because of, teams may want to pigeonhole him a little bit, is maybe a third down catching, receiving back, that sort of thing. Just maybe a little bit into kind of his blocking and how he does there, because that's one thing that, again, to get a lot of time, blocking is going to be a big thing in protection of the quarterback.
Sure, he was perfectly fine as a blocker. I mean, there was never, to be honest, that was never discussed. I mean, the entirety of his college career, which is not a bad thing, because if he was deficient, it would have been brought up.
Yeah.
So I think he checks the box. He certainly can block, and I think that he will be fine in that role. You're not going to put him in there with the express purpose of, hey, we want that to be your primary role. You don't want to beat up a guy who's 6 feet and 205 and have him blocking linebackers as a habit. But yes, when he needs to get the job done and protect the quarterback, he could do that. So I don't think that's a concern. And as far as the pass catching role, I think that at the end of the day, you're going to see a team draft him. I certainly hope you're going to see a team draft him that understands how to use him and that will come up with the ways to best utilize his skill set. Teams like New England, teams like Philadelphia, Green Bay, Denver, who they get it. And so, I've heard Washington thrown out there. So I hope that, wherever he goes, I hope it's to a team that really understands what they have and how best to get the best out of Christian, because he can hurt you in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think just from what I've seen, he's not the 25 carry guy, but he's that 20 touch guy. Maybe 10 to 12 runs and 6, 7, 8 catches out of the backfield. Almost kind of like a David Johnson type in terms of how the Arizona Cardinals use him. They Arian said they want to get Johnson 30 touches, not necessarily 30 runs. So yeah, I think that I'm sure that there's a team that has him in mind and will have and can find a way to use him to the best of his abilities, not just running but also catching, and finding that great combo, because he is a phenomenal talent, and I really look forward to seeing where he goes.
Yeah, as do I. I think, and again, you're just talking about such a unique guy that it's going to be fascinating to see how his game does translate to the next level.
All right. Again, this has been our conversation with Mr. Scott Reiss, the voice of Stanford Cardinal Football, and we've been talking about Christian McCaffrey. Again, Scott, I want to thank you for giving us some of your time to come on to our podcast and our show to talk about Christian. Hopefully next year, you've got a few more guys, whether, even if it's a lineman. I'm sure there's plenty coming out of Stanford over and over and over again with the program that's been built up there. We'd love to give you a call back next year and maybe talk a little more.
Sounds good. No problem.
All right. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
Yep.
Hey, Skull King Nation. Thank you for listening to the Skull King Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.